The rain hammered down on the parking lot like bullets against concrete, turning the asphalt into a mirror of gray despair. Adhiambo stood frozen beside her broken-down car, her hands trembling as she tried to shield her 2-year-old twins from the downpour. The boy, Kobe, coughed violently in her arms, while his sister Ayana cried from the shopping cart, tiny hands reaching out desperately for her mother. Grocery bags lay scattered across the wet ground, baby formula rolling into puddles, bread soaking in the rain. From inside a sleek silver Mercedes parked 30 feet away, Omari watched through rain-streaked windows. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly, his knuckles had turned pale. 3 years. It had been 3 years since he'd last seen that face, those eyes that once looked at him with such love before everything shattered between them. His heart pounded in his chest like a war drum, and beside him, his fiancée Chioma scrolled through her phone, oblivious to the storm raging inside him. The memories crashed over Omari like the rain outside. 3 years ago, he'd stood in their tiny apartment in Nairobi, his suitcase packed, while Adhiambo screamed at him through tears. She'd called him selfish, said he cared more about chasing money than building a life with her. He'd fired back, told her she was a dream killer who couldn't see his potential, who wanted to keep him small and comfortable, while the world offered so much more. What he didn't know, what she never told him in that final bitter moment, was that she was carrying his children. 1 month pregnant with twins, and she'd let him walk away without a word. Omari had left Nairobi with nothing but ambition burning in his chest and 20,000 shillings in his pocket. He'd worked construction jobs in Mombasa, slept in cramped rooms with 5 other men, eaten 1 meal a day, and saved every coin. His break came when he designed a supply chain solution for a struggling logistics company. Within 2 years, he'd turned that company around, bought it out, and expanded across East Africa. Now, at 32, he was worth more money than his younger self could have dreamed. He wore custom-tailored suits in gray and burgundy, drove luxury cars, and had Chioma, a stunning Nigerian corporate lawyer with smooth dark skin and an expensive taste for the finer things, sitting beside him as his future wife. They'd returned to Nairobi for business. Omari was set to acquire the very shipping company that had rejected his job application 5 years ago. It was supposed to be his victory lap, his chance to show everyone who doubted him that he'd made it. The local business magazine had already run a feature titled, "The Boy Who Left With Nothing Returns as a Millionaire." Everything was perfect, calculated, exactly as he'd planned, except for the anonymous text he'd received that morning. Just 5 words that had haunted him all day. "Welcome back. She needs you." Now, watching Adhiambo struggle in the rain with 2 children who looked exactly like they could be his, Omari felt his carefully constructed world tilting on its axis. Chioma finally looked up from her phone, her perfectly shaped eyebrows rising as she noticed his tension. "Why have we stopped?" "The restaurant reservation is in 20 minutes, she said, her voice carrying that clipped impatience he'd grown accustomed to. She was always rushing, always scheduling, always 3 steps ahead, and annoyed when the world didn't keep pace. Omari couldn't speak. His eyes were locked on Adhiambo, who'd finally managed to get both children back into the car. But the old Honda wouldn't start. He could see her turning the key again and again, her shoulders shaking. Not just from cold, but from something deeper. Exhaustion. Desperation. The kind of bone-deep weariness that comes from fighting a losing battle every single day. "Do you know her?" Chioma's question cut through his thoughts. Her voice had shifted, suspicious now, sharp like broken glass. "No," Omari lied, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. Just someone having car trouble. But he couldn't look away. Kobe, the little boy, pressed his face against the car window, his small features scrunched up in misery. And that's when Omari saw it. The birthmark. A distinctive crescent shape on the left side of the boy's neck, barely visible but unmistakable. The exact same birthmark Omari had inherited from his father, who'd inherited it from his father before him. 4 generations of the same marking, like a signature written in skin. His breath caught in his throat. The math clicked into place with devastating clarity. The twins appeared to be about 2 years old. His divorce from Adhiambo had been finalized 3 years ago, which meant, "We need to go," Kioma insisted, checking her diamond watch. "Omari, seriously, what's wrong with you?" "Give me a moment," he heard himself say, already opening the car door. "Don't you dare," Kioma warned, but he was already out in the rain, his expensive leather shoes splashing through puddles as he walked toward Adhiambo's car, like a man approaching his own execution. Adhiambo saw him coming. Through the rain-blurred windshield, their eyes met for the first time in 3 years, and what Omari saw in her expression wasn't joy or relief or even anger. It was pure terror. She frantically tried to start the car again, her movements panicked, desperate. The engine sputtered and died. He kept walking. When he reached her window, she didn't roll it down. Instead, she stared straight ahead, both hands gripping the steering wheel, her chest rising and falling with rapid breaths. Omari knocked gently on the glass. The sound seemed to break something inside her, and slowly, so slowly, she turned to face him. Up close, he could see the changes 3 years had carved into her. The exhaustion etched into lines around her eyes, the way her clothes hung loose on a frame that had grown too thin, the calluses on her hands visible even through the rain-streaked window. This wasn't the vibrant woman he'd married. This was someone who'd been ground down by life, worn to the bone. "Adhiambo," he said, his voice barely audible over the rain. "Please, let me help." Her lips moved, forming words he couldn't hear. Then she shook her head violently, reaching for the ignition again. Behind him, he heard Kioma's car door slam. Great. This was about to get complicated. "Omari!" Kioma's voice cut through the rain like a whip. She stood beside the Mercedes, in her designer heels and white dress, looking absolutely furious as the rain began to soak through her clothes. "Get back in the car, right now!" But something in Adhiambo's car had caught his attention. A stack of papers on the passenger seat, partially visible. Medical bills. He could see the hospital logo, see the numbers, and even from this angle, he could tell they were substantial. His eyes shifted to the children in the back seat. Ayana had stopped crying, but Kobe's cough had worsened. The boy's small chest heaved with each breath, his lips carrying a faint blue tinge that made Omari's blood run cold. Without thinking, he tried the car door. Locked. But Adhiambo's hand moved to the lock button, and for a moment he thought she might let him in. Instead, the engine suddenly roared to life. She'd gotten it started. Relief and disappointment warred in Omari's chest as he watched her put the car in reverse. "Wait!" he shouted, but she was already backing out, her tires sending up spray as she maneuvered around him. For just a second, as she passed, their eyes met again. And in that brief moment, Omari saw something that would haunt him for days to come. Not hatred, not even resentment. Just a deep, profound sadness that seemed to reach into his soul and squeeze. Then she was gone. The old Honda disappearing into the rain-soaked streets of Nairobi, leaving Omari standing in a puddle with water dripping from his expensive suit. "Are you out of your mind?" Chioma had reached him now, her carefully styled hair plastered to her head, makeup beginning to run. Who was that woman? And don't lie to me again. Omari turned to face his fiancée, and for the first time since they'd gotten engaged 6 months ago, he saw her clearly. Saw the calculation in her eyes, the way she valued appearances over substance, status over compassion. Saw how she looked at him not as a partner, but as a prize she'd won. "My ex-wife," he said flatly. Chioma's eyes widened, then narrowed. "The one you told me was ancient history? The one you said was probably remarried and happy?" "I thought she was." "And those children?" Chioma's voice had gone dangerously quiet. "I don't know." But even as he said it, the lie felt transparent. He did know. Deep in his bones, in that place where truth lives beyond logic and reason, he knew those children were his. The next 3 days passed in a blur of investigation. Omari hired a private detective, a discreet man named Kamau, who'd worked for him before on business matters. He gave Kamau one instruction: find out everything about Adhiambo's life since the divorce. The report arrived on the 3rd day, and reading it felt like taking a hammer to his chest, blow after blow after blow. Adhiambo had given birth to twins 8 months after their divorce, Kobe and Ayana. The birth certificates listed no father. She'd tried to contact Omari 2 years ago, had called his office repeatedly, sent emails, even written physical letters. But Omari's executive assistant at the time, a woman named Grace who'd taken it upon herself to protect him from his past, had blocked everything. She'd intercepted the calls, deleted the emails, thrown away the letters. When Adhiambo had finally gotten through to Grace directly, the assistant had told her firmly that Omari had moved on, that he was engaged to someone important, and that any further contact would be considered harassment. Omari had never known. He'd given Grace instructions years ago to filter out any unnecessary drama from his past life, never imagining those instructions would be used to hide his own children from him. The financial details were worse. Adhiambo worked 2 jobs. During the day, she waitressed at a local diner. At night, 3 times a week, she cleaned office buildings. Her monthly income barely covered rent, food, and basic utilities. The medical bills told an even grimmer story. Kobe had been born with a congenital heart defect. He needed surgery, specialized care, regular medications. The costs had piled up to $47,000. Insurance had denied most of the claims, citing pre-existing conditions and coverage gaps. Adhiambo had sold everything of value she owned. She'd borrowed from friends until they could lend no more. She was drowning, and she'd been drowning alone. The detective had included photos. Adhiambo at the diner, her smile tired but genuine as she served customers. Adhiambo at the office building late at night, her back bent as she mopped floors. Adhiambo at a free clinic with Kobe, her face etched with worry as a doctor examined her son. And one photo that nearly broke him. Adhiambo and the twins in their small apartment, celebrating what appeared to be the children's 2nd birthday. There was a small cake, probably homemade, 2 candles, and on the wall behind them, half hidden by a curtain, was their old wedding photo. She'd kept it. Omari sat in his luxury hotel suite, the report spread across the mahogany desk, and felt his carefully constructed life crumbling around him. All this time, while he'd been building his empire, attending cocktail parties, buying designer watches and imported cars, his children had been struggling. His son had been sick, possibly dying, and he hadn't known. Chioma found him there an hour later. She'd let herself in with the spare key card he'd given her, and she stood in the doorway of the suite's study, taking in the scattered papers, the photos, his hunched posture. "So it's true," she said quietly. "They're yours." Omari didn't bother denying it. "Yes, and you're going to help them." It wasn't a question. "Of course I am. He's my son. He needs surgery." Kioma walked further into the room, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. She wore a cream-colored pantsuit, perfectly tailored, every hair in place. She looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine. Beautiful, successful, composed, and utterly cold. "I already knew," she said, settling into one of the leather chairs. "About the children." The world seemed to stop. Omari's head snapped up. "What?" "I hired my own investigator 3 months ago. Before we announced the engagement, I needed to make sure there were no surprises in your past." Kioma examined her manicured nails casually. "I found out about your ex-wife and the twins, about the sick child, all of it." "And you didn't tell me?" Omari's voice came out as a whisper, thick with disbelief. "I was protecting our future," Kioma said simply. "You'd worked so hard to build yourself up. I wasn't going to let some woman from your past drag you back down with her problems. I made sure she couldn't reach you." You were behind the blocked calls? The deleted messages? "I reinforced what your assistant started, yes. Made sure she understood that any contact would have legal consequences." Kioma stood, smoothing her suit. "Omari, be realistic. That woman and those children, they're a liability. The boy's medical expenses alone could drain hundreds of thousands. And for what? So you can play hero to a life you left behind?" Something shifted in Omari's chest. A door closing on one life, another opening to something he hadn't known he'd lost. He stood slowly, and when he spoke, his voice was steady and cold. "Get out." "Excuse me?" "Get out of this room. We're done." Kioma's composed mask cracked. "You're joking. You're throwing away everything we built together for some ex-wife and her sick children?" "My children," Omari corrected. "My son who's dying. My daughter who needs her father. And you're right about one thing. I did work hard to build myself up. But what's the point of all this success if I can't use it to help the people who actually matter?" "I matter." Kioma's voice rose, control slipping. "I've stood by you, supported your business deals, introduced you to all the right people. I made you respectable." "No," Omari said quietly. "You made me into someone I don't recognize. Someone who could know his child is suffering and have to think about whether helping them is worth the cost. That's not who I want to be." "You're making a massive mistake," Kioma warned, but she was already backing toward the door. "Those kids will bleed you dry. That woman will trap you in poverty. You'll lose everything." "Then I'll lose it," Omari replied. "But I'll do it as myself, not as whoever you needed me to be." After Kioma left, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the paintings on the walls, Omari sat back down at the desk. He pulled out his phone and dialed Kamau, the investigator. "I need Adhiambo's address," he said, "and I need to know which hospital is treating her son." 2 hours later, Omari stood outside a modest apartment building in one of Nairobi's working-class neighborhoods. The building wasn't run down exactly, but it had the tired look of a place that had seen better days. Paint peeling in places, a crack in the front window, laundry hanging from balconies. This was so far removed from the penthouse suites and gated communities he'd grown accustomed to that it felt like stepping into a different world. He climbed 3 flights of stairs, his heart pounding harder with each step. What was he going to say? How did you apologize for 3 years of absence? How did you explain that you hadn't known, hadn't meant to abandon them? That if you'd known, you would have been there. Apartment 3C. The door was painted a faded yellow, and he could hear sounds from inside. A cartoon playing on television. A child's laughter. Normal family sounds that should have included him, but never had. Omari knocked. The sounds inside stopped. Footsteps approached, hesitant. The door opened just a crack, chain still attached, and Adhiambo's face appeared in the gap. When she saw him, the color drained from her face. "Please don't," she whispered. "Please just go." "I know about Kobe," Omari said, "about his heart, about the surgery he needs, about the bills." Adhiambo's hand went to her mouth. "How did you—" "I hired someone to find out, and I know about the calls, the messages. I know you tried to reach me." He took a breath. "I never got them. My assistant, and later my ex-fiancée, they blocked everything. I swear to you, Adhiambo, I didn't know. If I'd known, I would have been here." She stared at him through that small gap in the door, tears streaming down her face. "Ex-fiancé?" she asked, and despite everything, there was a small note of something in her voice. Not quite hope, maybe just curiosity. "Ended it today. Found out she'd been hiding your calls from me, that she knew about Kobe and Ayana, and kept it from me." Omari pressed his palm against the door frame. "Please, let me meet them properly. Let me help." "I don't want your money," Adhiambo said, but her voice cracked on the words. "It's not about what you want. It's about what Kobe needs. He's my son, Adhiambo. Whatever happened between us, whatever I did wrong, he doesn't deserve to pay for it." The door closed. For a moment, Omari thought she was shutting him out completely. Then he heard the chain slide free, and the door opened fully. Adhiambo stood there in worn jeans and an old T-shirt, her eyes red from crying, looking both terrified and exhausted. "One visit," she said. "That's all. Then you leave, and let us be." But as Omari stepped into that small apartment and saw his children for the first time as their father, saw Kobe's too pale skin and labored breathing, saw Ayana's curious eyes studying him, he knew one visit would never be enough. This wasn't something he could throw money at and walk away from. This was his family, broken and struggling and imperfect, but his nonetheless. The next few days moved with the speed of crisis. Omari contacted the best pediatric heart surgeon in East Africa, a doctor at a private hospital who normally had a 6-month waiting list. Money opened doors. Within 48 hours, Kobe was admitted for a full evaluation. The diagnosis was serious but treatable. The surgery would cost $125,000. Without it, the doctor said gently, Kobe had perhaps 6 months. Maybe less. Omari wrote the check without hesitation, but it was the scene in the hospital waiting room that would stay with him forever. Adhiambo had broken down completely, sobbing into her hands, her entire body shaking with the release of 3 years of overwhelming pressure. He'd reached for her instinctively, and she'd collapsed against him, crying into his shoulder while little Ayana patted her mother's leg, confused and worried. "I was so scared," Adhiambo whispered between sobs. "I was so scared he was going to die, and I couldn't stop it. I worked so hard. I did everything I could. But it wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough." "You're not alone anymore," Omari told her, and meant it with every fiber of his being. The surgery took 6 hours. 6 hours of pacing hospital corridors, of drinking bad coffee, of watching Adhiambo pray with an intensity that seemed to shake her whole body. Ayana fell asleep in Omari's arms halfway through, her small hand curled around his thumb, and he marveled at how something so simple could feel so profound. This was his daughter. This tiny person trusted him enough to sleep in his arms. When the surgeon finally emerged, still in his scrubs, his face was tired but smiling. The surgery was successful. Kobe's going to need time to recover, and there will be follow-up treatments, but he's going to be fine. Adhiambo's legs gave out. Omari caught her, held her up, felt her heart racing against his chest. "Thank you," she whispered to the doctor, to God, to the universe, to anyone who would listen. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." The recovery period brought them together in ways Omari hadn't expected. He rented an apartment near the hospital, close to Adhiambo's place. Not with her, he was careful about that, respecting the boundaries between them, but close enough that he could be there when she needed help, when the nights got too long, when Ayana needed someone to play with so Adhiambo could rest. He learned his daughter's laugh, discovered she loved stories about animals and hated green vegetables. He sat beside Kobe's hospital bed and read to his son, watched the boy's color slowly return, his breathing grow easier. He learned that Kobe was quiet and thoughtful, that he noticed everything, that his smile when it came was like sunshine breaking through clouds. And he talked to Adhiambo. Really talked, maybe for the first time in their entire relationship. They spoke about what had gone wrong in their marriage, about his ambition and her fears, about the bitter things they'd said that couldn't be unsaid. She told him about the pregnancy, about finding out 2 weeks after he'd left, about deciding not to tell him because she'd read about his new business ventures in the newspaper and convinced herself he was better off without the burden of children. "I thought I was doing the right thing," she admitted one evening, both of them sitting in the hospital cafeteria over terrible tea. "You'd wanted success so badly. I thought if I told you about the babies, you'd come back out of obligation and resent us forever. I thought it was kinder to let you go." "There's nothing kind about keeping a man from his children," Omari said, but his voice wasn't angry, just sad. "I would have come back, Adhiambo. I would have figured it out. We could have figured it out together." "Would we?" She looked at him directly. "Be honest. If I'd told you I was pregnant that day you were leaving, would you really have stayed? Or would you have felt trapped?" Omari wanted to say yes immediately, to insist he would have done the right thing. But honesty made him pause, made him really think about who he'd been 3 years ago. That ambitious, hungry young man who'd seen Nairobi as a prison and the world as a prize to be won. "I don't know," he admitted finally. "Maybe I would have felt trapped. Maybe I would have resented it. But I'd like to think I would have grown up fast enough to realize what mattered." "You've grown up now," Adhiambo said softly, and something in her eyes made his breath catch. 3 months after Kobe's surgery, Omari found himself at a birthday party in Adhiambo's apartment. The twins were turning 3, and the small living room was decorated with homemade streamers and balloons. There was a cake, this time from a proper bakery because Omari had insisted, and a pile of presents that made Adhiambo shake her head in mock disapproval. "You're spoiling them," she'd said when he arrived with the gifts. "I have 3 years to make up for," he'd replied. "I'm just getting started." The party was small, just Adhiambo's sister, a few neighbors, some children from Ayana's playgroup. No business associates in designer suits, no networking opportunities. Just people who genuinely cared about these children, celebrating life and health and family. As Omari watched Kobe blow out his candles, his son's cheeks pink with health now, his breath strong and clear, something swelled in his chest. This was what success looked like. Not the bank accounts, or the business deals, or the magazine features. This moment, watching his children surrounded by love, knowing they were safe and cared for. After the party, after the guests had left and the twins were tucked into bed, Adhiambo and Omari stood in her tiny kitchen washing dishes together. It was domestic and ordinary and perfect. "I have something for you," Adhiambo said suddenly, drying her hands on a towel. She disappeared into her bedroom and returned with an envelope, yellowed with age. "I wrote this 3 years ago," she explained, handing it to him. "The day I found out I was pregnant. I never sent it because, well, because of everything. But I think you should read it now." Omari opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a letter in Adhiambo's handwriting, slightly smudged in places as if tears had fallen on the ink while she wrote. The letter was beautiful and heartbreaking. She'd written about their love, about how she'd known he needed to leave to become the man he was meant to be. She'd written about the pregnancy, about her decision to let him go, about her belief that he would do great things. And at the end, one line that brought tears to his eyes: "Come back when you've found yourself. We'll be waiting." "You knew," Omari whispered. "You always knew I'd come back." "I hoped," Adhiambo corrected. "Hope and knowledge aren't the same thing. But yes, I hoped that someday you'd find your way home to us." Omari looked at this woman, this incredible woman who'd borne his children alone, worked herself to exhaustion, faced down impossible odds, and still had enough love in her heart to forgive him. And he realized something that made everything else fall into place. "I love you," he said. "I never stopped. I just forgot for a while what love actually meant." Adhiambo's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "I love you too. But Omari, we can't just pick up where we left off. Too much has happened. We're different people now." "I know," he agreed. "So we start over. Properly this time. I want to earn your trust back. I want to be the father Kobe and Ayana deserve. And if you'll let me, I want to be the man worthy of you." She reached out and took his hand, her fingers interlacing with his. "One day at a time?" "One day at a time," he promised. 6 months later, anyone looking at Omari's life would have seen the changes. He'd sold his majority stake in the logistics company, keeping enough to live comfortably but divesting himself of the consuming ambition that had driven him for so long. He'd moved permanently back to Nairobi, into a modest 3-bedroom house with a yard where Kobe and Ayana could play. He and Adhiambo weren't married again. Not yet. Maybe someday. But they were taking it slow, rebuilding trust, like constructing a house brick by careful brick. They had dinner together most nights, alternating between his house and her apartment. They took the twins to the park on weekends. They went to all of Kobe's medical appointments together. Some of his old business associates thought he'd lost his mind, giving up his empire for domestic life. Kioma had tried to contact him once, 6 months after their split, suggesting they talk things through. He'd politely declined. That life, that version of himself, was gone, and he didn't miss it at all. What he had now was richer than any bank account. Ayana running to him when he picked her up from preschool, shouting, "Daddy!" loud enough for the whole world to hear. Kobe's hand in his as they walked to the doctor for checkups. His son's complete trust that his father would keep him safe. Adhiambo's smile across the dinner table, genuine and warm, and earned through actions, not promises. He thought sometimes about that day in the rain, watching Adhiambo struggle while he sat in his luxury car with Kioma beside him. Thought about how close he'd come to driving away, to never knowing his children, to living the rest of his life as half a person. Real success, Omari had learned, wasn't measured in money or status or power. It was measured in love freely given and responsibility willingly shouldered. It was measured in the lives you touched and the people you showed up for, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. He'd thought he needed to conquer the world to prove his worth. But the truth was simpler and more profound. His worth wasn't something he needed to prove. It was something he needed to live every single day in the way he loved his children and honored the woman who'd given him a second chance he didn't deserve, but would spend his life trying to earn. Sometimes, life gives you a chance to correct your biggest mistakes. Not everyone gets that opportunity. Omari had gotten his, standing in the rain, watching his past and future collide. And this time, he'd made the right choice. He'd chosen family over pride, love over ambition, real wealth over paper riches. He'd chosen to come home.